RIVERRUN. Past eve and Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings us by a commodious vicus of recirculation back to Howth Castle and environs. Sir Tristram Viola de Ramores, from o'er the short sea, had passed and arrived from North Armorica, on this side the scraggy isthmus of Europe Minor, to wield or fight his peninsulate war. Nor had top Sawyer's rocks by the stream Oconee exaggerated themselves to Lawrence County's Gorgios while they went Dublin their mumper all the time. Nor a voice from a fire belowsed Misha Misha to Tauf Tauf thou art Patrick. Not yet, though vinny soon after. Had a kid scad but ended a bland old Isaac, not yet, though all's fair in vanity. Where Sozy Sether's groth with Tuan Nathan Joe. Rot a peck of pall malts had gin or shem brewed by arc light, and glory in to the Regenbrow was to be seen ringsome on the aqua face. The fall, ba 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 dal garag takan menaronk on bronton grunton dunkurb hunskorn to who hordenen thurnak of a once wall straight old pars retailed early in bed and later on life down through all Christian minstrelsy. The great fall of the off-wall entailed at such short notice the pshut of Finnegan, ere solid man, that the humpty hillhead of himself promptly sends an unquiring one well to the west in quest of his tumpty toes, and their upturned pike point in place is at the knockout in the park, where oranges have been laid to rust upon the green since Devlin's first loved Liffey. Welcome. I'm Professor Rachel Fulton Brown, and this is the Mosaic Ark. Why a mosaic? Why an ark? Well, tonight, my co-host and I, Kilts Khalfan, are going to teach you to speak internet if you didn't already know, and if you didn't understand what I was just saying, we're here to take you on a journey with us through the wilds of the mosaic. Well, so I'm still here alone because we're having some tech issues, and Skype is trying to communicate all the way across the entire globe, and so I'll just warm us up. How's that? So I'm very happy to see all of you here on the internet, and I apologize to UATV viewers, particularly for being so long gone. It's been a wild year, hasn't it? I mean, yesterday the CDC finally says that, there is no difference between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, which we all kind of knew. But this feeling of where are we now? What kind of journey are we now going to be on now that, well, the masks are off? Well, we've taken our masks off. And what Kilts and I are going to do with you tonight and then in this live stream over, we hope weekly over the next however long it takes. I think we're on a long journey now. She and I have been on the poetry journey in our Dragon Common room now together for 2 full years. We're working on our 3rd poem together. We have, a full team of writers and artists, and the kinds of things that we've been learning from being on the internet are some of the things that we wanted to share with you in this Mosaic Ark. Well, why a mosaic, why an ark? It's going to take a little bit of setup and preparation to get you to the point where I hope that intro just made sense. It's all there, absolutely all of there is encapsulated in that series of images, and it's also a clue to, I think, what it is, what kind of moment that we're living through. Being here on the internet, the streaming, and this is like the metaphors that we're living in are very, very resonant and significant. And that's where I want us to start. That's really where I want us to start. Now, I'm realizing I'm out of practice being on my own, right? What have I been doing all my lonesome for this past year? Well, we published Aurora Borealis in the winter. Those of you who've watched our little promo tech stream practice will know that we were working on that for the bears all through last winter. It's been out now for about 6 months, and some of what I hope to share with you tonight is also going to draw on some of the writing process that we went through in bringing that poem to publication. But it's also, what I'm also really hoping to do is open out for you the way in which this poetry work has also been intersecting with my scholarly journey. My scholarly journey went on a bit of a detour the last 5 or 6 years, thanks to all of the things that I've been learning about in blogging and being friends with Milo, and meeting Vox and Owen, meeting a lot of other people out here and in the internet, playing on Telegram. But I'm happy to report that as of I don't know, the time frames are often kind of difficult to remember now. I've started coming back to my scholarship, and I realized why I had to take this sort of detour through. I mean, not so much Tolkien. Tolkien was always part of my scholarship there, but really this detour through the internet to learn certain things that I needed to know in order to be a better medievalist. And that's a kind of funny way to say it, because it's like, well, but you trained as a medievalist, you know how to do scholarship, you know how to make references and citations and find all the sources and everything. Well, but I also never made sense to my colleagues, right? That I didn't, as an academic, seem to have just a straightforward relationship with, doing that scholarship, doing all those footnotes. I was always trying to break out of the frame and say, I want to look at the frame. I want to look at the outside and the inside and the participation that we're in. Well, thankfully, over the past year, I've been given an insight into how I was kind of always already in this RIVERRUN stream, as my poets and I have been talking about it. That I was always already trying to understand the medium that we were participating in, because I started back as an undergraduate with a professor who taught New Testament when I was an undergraduate in Houston. And this was Professor Werner Kelber. He was already interested in the difference between the oral and the written gospel, the way in which Jesus in his teaching was remembered, and then how that remembered gospel, that oral, communal, transmitted gospel, verbal, vocal, transmitted gospel, was written down, and what kinds of changes it occurred in the act of transcription, as it were. And that was literally where I started as a scholar, because Professor Kelber's classes on thinking about the way Jesus was represented in the Gospels became the background for everything that I did in my own scholarship, and showing the way in which medieval Christians were reading the scriptures for stories about Christ and Mary, and reading scriptures that you wouldn't think of as being about Christ and Mary, particularly the Song of Songs, but also the Psalms. And those of you who are familiar with my published work, my books, From Judgment to Passion and Marrying the Art of Prayer, will know that is what I was trying to do. I was trying to show you this medieval way of reading, which I got very excited, particularly in Marrying the Art of Prayer, at thinking I can take you into the frame of their practice. Well, various fortunes that my scholarship has had over the last few years. One of them was, and I keep saying this because it gets more normal and ordinary, I didn't get promoted to full professor, right? I'm still an associate professor, which Vox said something about this a few years ago in one of his dark streams. What happened? Well, some of what happened was I played on the internet too much. But I've more recently come to a sort of calmer understanding of, well, what I was always doing was too far ahead. I got that, right? But it was too far ahead into this mosaic, which is our digital world, our digital a digital electronic manuscript world of juxtapositions and memes and jokes and streaming. And oddly enough, the reason I got there was because Professor Kelber had already been showing me the direction to go, and he was doing that because he had been a student of Walter Ong, and Walter Ong, who's a Jesuit, had studied at St. Louis University with Marshall McLuhan. Now, our sort of topic tonight is very much, we're going to show you what McLuhan has taught us about being in the medium, right? Being the way in which the medium is the message, the way in which we understand our environment as shaped by the kind of media that we're participating in. Most people know McLuhan as, he was that weird media guru back in the 60s who talked about turning in and dropping out. No, wait, that was Timothy Leary. It was like we were all already in the shamanistic rainbow age of Aquarius that is the electronic media of radio and movies and television and so forth. And McLuhan was able to talk about all of this as a kind of absorptive experience, this into the light, right? If you go back and you review this video and you look again at that intro that I just showed you, that array of books that you saw under my name is some of the reading that I've been doing over the decades in this past year. It's both McLuhan, it's both my books, and it's also Rupert of Deutz, or John Bennigan's book on Rupert of Deutz. And we're trying to learn how to be within this, the fancy word is exegesis, within this experience of being within the scriptures, which I was always participating in. We say, okay, you studied, New Testament with Professor Kelber, and he was studying with Walter Ong, who was doing, orality and literacy, and they were studying with Marshall McLuhan. Wait, we thought Marshall McLuhan was talking about like ads. He was like meme lords back in the ad days, and McLuhan's talking about television being this cool medium that gets projected onto you. And what does that have to do with medieval manuscript culture in the New Testament? Well, this is what's so delightful about it. McLuhan was actually trained as a medievalist. And so what he came to in his understanding of media was in fact out of his own training in the arts of the Trivium, the arts of the Quadrivium and the Trivium, and the way in which grammar and rhetoric and dialectic were studied in the medieval universities and monastic schools. Now, what was interesting about this was he never meant to be talking about the Middle Ages. What he was trying to do was talk about the 16th century and why they ended up in certain battles between the dialecticians and the grammarians. But in order to understand that, he had to go back, sort of back in time, and you end up on this great river of understanding and mystery. And there's layers and layers and layers here. If you look at the books on my bed, you can see some of the pattern there. It's like it's I have to lay it out on my bed as a mosaic so that you start seeing the way in which these things connect and interconnect and come together. That I found out that I'd actually always been doing what McLuhan was wrestling with, in that he had rediscovered the way in which medieval Christians read the scriptures. And if we read in the Medium and in the Light, where he's talking about the way in which Christians are behaving in this new media environment, he's a lot about Vatican II and so forth. You start realizing that we are in one of these great threshold moments, as big as the transition between manuscript and print, the transition between print and electricity in the 19th century blew open the doors, and now we've gone from the electrical to the digital, and that's what we want to share with you now. I have the privilege of, I think, finding out that my partner is here now. So she's laughing, and now you can't hear her yet. You'll let me bring her in.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but now I have to resize you because you came at
That was my bad.
Yeah, the people can hear you. Apologize profusely for making the professor
I'm so
have to be
sorry.
inelegant with her tack. There's no forgiving you on this.
This was a punk setup.
Your punk setup, and I'm not making you pretty right now. Just a sec. You need to move more. You're in the corner of the picture.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How is that possible?
I don't know. That's you need to, I don't know which way to say you have to move. You need to move towards me in the screen, but now we just have you in the window. Moved I think to your right. I did it. Yes, I did it. Okay.
Woo-hoo!
So you are now in. Right. Okay. So I'm telling the people about McLuhan and the problem, and I'm all scholarly and stuff like that. Thank you for saving me. These people have no idea what I've been talking about for the last 15 minutes. which is why it's actually very important that it's the two of us and not just me turning this into a lecture. Please translate for the people what I've just been talking about.
Okay, what have you been talking about?
I don't know. McLuhan. Tell them what you now know about McLuhan, thanks to my... I've just given them the actual, like, okay, here's my pedigree, here's my bibliography, got my books on the bed as my bibliography. Kilts, thank the Lord, can translate all that into ordinary speech.
Well, what are we doing with the poetry?
Yeah, and that too, right? So...
What are we doing with the poetry? Well, why did we get into McLuhan in the first place? Like, we were thrown into that because...
Help me!
Because we've all been trying to figure out exactly why the media and the tech we're using is transforming the way we're thinking, right? And for anyone out there who doesn't know, DCR is Rachel Fulton Brown's brainchild. So Dragon Common Room has been the kernel of us beginning this kind of McLuhan-esque medieval adventure together. Basically, she figured out that what we were doing on Telegram was essentially a medieval style of communication. And I mean, that's basically where I can start. You're
doing a way better job of explaining me than I was. Keep going.
It's because I've had to think about it so much. It's for anyone who doesn't realize, don't make friends with world famous historians unless you want to constantly think about stuff. No, it's good. Yeah, we're trying to figure out exactly what the shift is, because we can all feel it. I mean, our brains have changed since we started using the internet.
Yes.
And especially in a medium like Telegram, we start talking about the medium as the massage, the medium as the message, the way McLuhan did. We've gone through a massive neurological shift in using that medium. I don't know, I speak for myself, but I know the professor has felt it as well. Since we started using it in 2019, there's been a massive explosion in terms of what we're able to communicate with each other there that we would not have been able to in many other forums, right?
Right.
I mean, how many people can do group poetry to the level that we're doing it at, with all of the research that goes into it and the side conversations that are going into it, without that particular medium? It just wouldn't have been possible in any other way. So what the professor is doing is looking at what McLuhan was looking at, which is how the technology of the medieval people influenced their monastic practice, and then, of course, what happened to Europe when the printing press came on the scene, and what that did to the psychology of Christendom. Yeah.
Yes, I'm gonna so now you all understand why Kilts and I need to be together, right? Because there's
yes.
we just proof of concept here. If you just have me, right? And Milo loves saying this to me. It's like nobody ever understands what you're talking about. And I'm like, I understand what I'm talking about, but most everybody else. So Kilts, whether you were watching the stream before you were here, I start by reading James Joyce, right? Now, the usual, because as you do, right? If you're going to start a new internet, live stream, what the first thing you do is read RIVERRUN. It's going to sound like gibberish, right? That was, and I actually tried to practice what the thunder says, and I still bungled it, right? So that it was to my mind a demonstration of like most of what I say into the internet without the translation of the poetry or the memes or the kind of work that we've been doing together in DCR sounds to people like gibberish, right? Joyce sounds like absolute, utter, complete, terrible, high academic, gotta read this with 18 million footnotes gibberish. But there's one phrase in that opening page that I read that I know is what we're doing, and it's Christian minstrelsy. There's something about what Joyce was, Joyce, whether he was, he's trained by Jesuits and, whether he's Catholic in his long run or not, or who knows what, he's trying to show us what the joy of the Christian story is. And this gibberish that's coming out in this dream vision that he's describing is I think it's the way Christians sound when we're in the world, right? We sound like we're nuts constantly. It's always, always, always nuts. And I'm saying, to me, all of it makes sense. The medieval Christian exegesis makes sense. I for tonight I brought some sample passages just to show you how zany it sounds, right? But to me there's a beautiful structure in it. I know how to think of it through the liturgy. I know how to think of it as joyous. I know how to think of it in terms of these magical, alchemical, transformative images in it. But when I speak either as an academic, if I speak as an academic to ordinary people, I sound like the thunder, right? What? I'm going to try it again because I say ba ba ba
well, I understand you.
On bron tonar ron tuan thun tunar hunans quan tuhu horden and I had to write it out, right? Most of the time, I think when I'm speaking to ordinary people, that's what they hear. It's just this rumble, 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 right? But it's deeply, deeply meaningful if you are somehow within the right dreamscape. And that's I realized in retrospect when I came into Telegram and the first thing I was in was Milo's chat, and that was this wild sort of surfing of different characters and churches of Telegram and stuff like that. But I didn't make any sense there because I was playing with stickers. I was too silly. I was serious as a professor, but why is she playing with snap stickers and stuff like that and the furries and oh my gosh, and it just made no sense. And then after I'd been in there a year and COVID hit, and I'm like, okay, we need a common room where we write poetry and where I can figure out what it is I'm trying to do when I say what will save us is iambic pentameter.
Yes. Well, you always made sense to me.
To absolutely nobody else did I make sense.
No, you speak perfectly. I like thunder. Maybe it's just an Australian thing. we speak in thunder down here. Thunder down under.
Thunder down under. Yeah.
Look, I think this is the problem though. It's because I'm not thinking normally half of the time. Like in DCR, we have a very Joycean way of thought. And McLuhan talked about this with amateurs, right? He said that in this digital era, the amateur is going to have great prowess in the sense that the amateur isn't worried about the specialism, right? Because the electric eliminates the linear hyperspecialism of the printing press, where now you're coming from academia post-printing press, which is all about hyperspecialism. Although you can you can do both because you're a medievalist. But I think a lot of the fear around talking to academics is that you're talking to someone who's hyper specialized, who has been Gutenberg to death, to the point where iconographic thinking has been completely eliminated, because if there is no footnotes and there are not 500,000 references for what you're talking about, it doesn't exist. So what essentially I saw you doing when you were being amazing with the stickers.
I love Bitmoji. It's me and stickers, right?
Before you get your sticker privileges taken away for abusing them.
I constantly lost my stickers.
Yes, she did. It's true. But this is it. It was like I could see what you were doing. This is a medieval marginalia, right, just in moving time, you know. So why would monastics spend, you know, countless hours in a scriptorium developing these beautiful manuscripts, developing these gorgeous illuminated gospels and all of these other religious texts, and then in the corner you have someone fighting on a donkey or like a rabbit sort of like you know, wrapped up in a sheet and being fed to a little weasel backwards. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's a kind of madness which is exploding out of the text. But I think that people underestimate that this kind of behavior, it's the behavior of healthy Christic psyche.
Yes.
So this is what I saw you doing, and then, you know, we kept talking. I thought, oh my god, I have to I have to follow this woman around the internet, because I knew exactly what you were doing. So in terms of like whether or not everyone can speak Thunder, I think everybody can. It's just that we've been dealing with a world where anything intellectual has been in Gutenberg.
Yes, and you say,
and until now,
go ahead,
us amateurs, we haven't been able to access it at all. It's behind a wall.
Well, the funny thing about the being Gutenberg, it's like what we're going to try to show people, and what we've learned in writing the poetry and playing with all of the images and the stickers and so forth, is in fact you do the referencing already, right? It's like saying, yes, Telegram. Anybody who's been playing in Telegram, which is where we've been working on this poetry, already knows how to do all of these kind of allusions and references and nonsense names and thunder stories and, you know, the RIVERRUN. It's all already in our experience. And, you know, some of it is saying, oh my gosh, she's given up on the culture, and, you know, you're just going to go into the you know, the culture wars have been lost. You know, Professor Fulton Brown is going to do nothing but digital media. And I was like, well, no, because we're missing out on the art of, indeed, also the printed world, right? It's interesting. In losing Christian art, we don't just we don't just lose access to the medieval or corrupt the present. We actually lose access also to the art of the printed period. It's the structure and the beauty. Iambic pentameter is, you know, early printed English. It's Shakespeare. It's Alexander Pope that we started with, right? It's Milton. It's the greatest poetry in the English language was printed in iambic pentameter, and so the linearity of it, as well as the thundering heartbeat of the sound and the resonances. McLuhan often got accused of, you know, being anti-print, and he was like, no, I'm a book man. I love, you know, I want people to be able to read the books, but in order to understand why people aren't reading the books, he was suggesting we also need to understand the media that they're immersed in and the differences between them, right? So saying, you know, here we are on this streaming medium that, you know, the digital world is making possible to us. Can that mean that we learn again to read books? Can that mean that we learn again to read manuscripts? Can that mean that we learn again to immerse ourselves in all Christian art and not, you know, I get very upset with it. People say, oh, you want to live in the Middle Ages? I'm like, no, I live now. I want to have the joy of Christ in the art that we are making now in all of these media registers, right? So I don't want people to have this feeling that I'm at war with academia. I'm not. Academia has its place as well as the digital. And it's interesting that we end up in these battles, which is, I was also telling them at the beginning, McLuhan was a student of medieval education because he was trying to understand the 16th century and the battles that broke out both in the Middle Ages and in the early printing period that can feel very familiar now, right? They're sort of the fake binaries that everybody ends up trapped in. You're endlessly arguing over the red and the blue, the trad and the ortho, the this and the that, and they're actually two parts of the same twin. They're twin pairs.
So we talked about that a lot. What exactly was it about printing that transformed Christendom? I think it's probably a good thing for you to explain to everybody, because that'll get them to be able to think about why we're emphasizing minstrelsy so much. Mm-hmm. So why is it that printing press sent such an intense vibrational shift, if you want to call it that, throughout Christendom?
So McLuhan was able to think about the way media create the environment that people exist in, and it was very interesting because he has this sort of twin idea of media are extensions of our bodies, but also our minds, and with the electric, our nervous systems, right? It's like you end up with this like vast electronic brain out there, which is like all of our psyches extended physically and mentally into the internet. With printing, he understood. So you have to look at the actual like form of the media itself. Printing presses were, you'll like this, right? This is one of the we tag everything in Dragon Kamaru's McLuhan moment now, right? Here's this McLuhan moment. The printing press was originally made from wine presses. The same technology as wine pressing, right? Crushing of grapes, making drink, right? It's like the same kind of screw press thing that's like they rejig it to be a machine for printing down on the paper, right? So it's a wine press that you then make mechanical type with. So he said printing mechanizes everything. It turns, everybody's surrounded by this mechanical reproduction of the little pieces of lead, right? Molten lead that you are then pressing into. Mm-hmm. So it's replicable in that, and it has this mechanized effect. It's also because you can make multiple copies of that same page. It takes away a lot of the sort of, obviously, the handwritten stuff of manuscripts, so it's more rigid and structured. But what he understood was it forces you to read in a very linear way, right? You have to focus on the eye on a line of text, and you do this line work. And what he realized is that psychologically that trains you to be very, very visual. You've lost the oral character of what he said was, and he was right. Medieval education was a lot more oral in certain ways, because people would like copy out the books as the lectures are happening because they're hearing it read. And with the printing press, you read to yourself much more, not absolutely, but and it's all this linear stuff, right? Every student that I have who comes to me and they're looking guilty, and I can look at them and I say, "How much do you read?" And that they're ready for the kids these days, they've lost all education, they don't read enough. And if I can get them their trust, I'm like, well, you're reading all the time because you've got your phone, right? But it scrolls, right? It feels different. There's a malleable. But the digital is obviously very. It's not necessarily ephemeral because we can archive it too, but it's fluid. You can resize it and stuff. Printed pages are fixed, right? You have to fix your eye on it. They're very stable. You have to learn to train yourself that way. People don't read right now because it's physically hard. And what McLuhan actually appreciated was how disciplined that kind of reading practice actually was, and therefore the psychological effects of reading in that mode actually were. Contrast that with being, radio or a live stream or an audiobook or all of the other ways that you can have language come at you. The electric world made it possible to like be in surround sound constantly, and that's what McLuhan was saying. The kids these days in the 1960s who were surrounded by electronic music, record players and transistor radios, and I guess by the 70s we had, Walkmans and tapes and stuff. You don't have to like train. You don't have to be in your eye like that all the time, right? You're in the rainbow electric.
You're in
You're
rainbow
in rainbow
time.
time.
So you've just given me a thought. In terms of the effect then of reading printed material, a printed medium, what does that do to a culture? Because if reading print is a discipline itself, in order to read print, you need to be disciplined enough to sit down and read it. What is that going to do to cultures that then have alphabets? Versus oral cultures that don't have alphabets?
Well, and what's interesting about that is alphabet culture is obviously also manuscript culture or stone culture, right? Cuneiform is clay tablets, stones. So alphabet is a layer. It's like I guess I spent this past week learning how to put everything into our OBS set, right? And so we have like layers of this and layers of that. And it's like if you're thinking in terms of which layer is which, the alphabet's a very ancient and powerful layer that creates empires. And it certainly creates the ability to have long distance information travel. So the ancient empires are all, the first thing the alphabet does is create power, right? And particularly with the Romans, you get the imperial legions need both the roads. Everybody knows that, right? So you think of them roads. Those roads are military rivers, as it were. They're land rivers that the military can move along. But you also need writing to be able to send the orders. And so alphabets, and McLuhan got this a little bit from this other scholar, Harold Innis, which everyone says, oh, McLuhan's just stealing from Harold Innis. Like, no, this is the way scholars work. We just like get an idea and build on it. That Innis understood that this imperial technology of roads and alphabet was essential to the Roman Empire. But then when you get printing, two other things happen. One, you get a large enough population reading exactly the same text in their own vernaculars that you get nationalism. And on the other side of things, you get this very private interior feeling of me and my book. So you get individualism. The features of modernity, of the private and the individual, become the thing that we think of as modernity. But that all gets completely fractured and disrupted with the electric in the 19th century, with first the telegram. I mean, it's interesting that we're doing all this work now in Telegram, a digital app that's reproducing the disruptions of the 19th century. The radio, the television, the movies, all of that kind of media disrupts the print, disrupts the primacy of print. So we've been, watching the death of print for longer than people tend to recognize. And all of our sort of old style academic practices of everybody needs to have the same book in the room and you're all following along, looking at the text in the same passage that the teacher is telling you to look at, right? Of course, people find that hard now because I'm trying to teach in my classrooms, and I've got a lot of, online sources that people are using because they're less expensive originally, and now they're more dynamic and stuff. Nobody's ever on the same page because we can't, the pages aren't that stable. You can't all be in the same book because you're looking at these movable, scalable, transformable images that are also glowing at you because they're coming through the glass, that light that's shining onto you. And McLuhan would have you pay attention to all of those different layers, right? The alphabet, the mechanical reproduction, the digitally transmitted reproduction, all of that creates our psychic space.
So, I think it's dropped out. I'm thinking about this because what a lot of people are talking about now in terms of culture wars is whether or not we're going to go into nationalism, we're fighting for nationalism, right. We're going against globalism, without thinking about the effects that international communication in the electric is having on human cultural development, or even just on the ability for someone to say, I am of X nation anymore. What is the electric doing to people in that sense? Are we able to have the same kind of borders that we had in the 19th century in the electric age?
No, and the thing is, the 19th century couldn't have them. That's the thing, that the borders, that the way we think of national borders are a feature of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. There's a feature of the print period. And you could, I mean, you can see two things. The great changes in media bring about these massive cultural transformations, that they also tend to make people go crazy. And you end up in war,
Yeah.
right? It's like it's very easy to see. And I've started realizing the scholarship has actually touched on all of these things, but it's not been a kind of, because I, as a medievalist, dip in and out of the modern period depending on when I'm teaching history of European civilization, and also when I have to listen to my colleagues give job talks about their fields and such. And I realize we've had pieces of all of this for a long time, but the scholarship, like the print scholarship, it's out there in all these all of these books that you may or may not read yourself, right? But if you hear someone talk about it, you can start putting pieces together, and you realize, okay, the 19th century scholars all recognize that the telegraph really did bring in enormous disruptions. It starts, being available in the 1840s, and what do you have by 1848? Massive revolutions across all of Europe. What do you have by the middle of the 20th century in the United States? Oh, guess what? A civil war, right? You have the consolidation of Italy and Germany, quote, out of these disparate regions that had never existed as nations, either as Italy or Germany. Italia was a Roman province. Germany was a concept of empire. By the late 19th century, they've turned into what we think of as the modern nations of Italy and Germany. But they were forced consolidations across language groups and cultural centers and things like that. Thinking about what happened to Germany by the early 20th century, well, England had been in charge of the empire throughout the 19th century because they have both their maritime empire and, English is the publishing powerhouse of modernity. More books right now are published in English than anything else. It's huge. It's around the world, but it's massive. Maybe not in China. I was looking at that once. It's like publish English is the dominant publishing language. And in the early 20th century, there's Italy and Germany challenging England or Britain, right? The First World War and the Second World War were imperial. There were challenges to Britain's empire in the electronic age. And if you think about the ways in which those were fought, both with radio, propaganda. What we're living through right now is the effects of those media transformations, and the British Empire, both took advantage of it and then was destroyed because of it, or self-destroyed, I think. Imploded. Well, it tried desperately to destroy Germany, and the Germans come back in the Second World War with new uses of film and radio and stuff like that, and it's quite terrifying, the power of those media effects. But the good thing that McLuhan is able to show is we're all in it, right? You may feel like you're taking sides in these moments, like Germany versus the Great Britain or something, but in fact everybody's affected by the media in the same sort of register level environment, right? So you were asking, it's like, what do we do with nationalism now in this digital media? Well, not what you did in print. You can't get that back, because we're in this completely new surround.
So because we're in the surround sound of the electric, we're not going to be able to do what they did in Italy, which is unify a bunch of disparate nation states, or Germany, for example, which was just the federation of all of these little duchies and other provinces. People seem to still be forming something like nations in the digital. it doesn't look like physical nationality anymore. That's what I'm really fascinated by. We talked about our pigeons. Can I talk about Pigeon Hitler?
You can. Well, you can, but I haven't introduced the pigeons yet, so you'll have to have to bring the pigeons on stage here.
It's a really odd segue. But well, it was McLuhan, right? He was talking about Germany being essentially tribal in nature, and the introduction of the electric communication into Germany and how that was hijacked by antichrists. I mean, you're probably going to be able to explain this better, but we were focusing on this as a way of looking at what does electric communication do to human beings? Why is it that we're particularly receptive, like in an almost trance-like state, to things that are getting broadcast in that surround sound medium? So we were looking at, like, how is it that particular regimes or particular political revolutions or these kinds of things are able to hijack populations very quickly through the electric medium? You want to comment before I go into the pigeon-esque nature of the human mind?
Hold the pigeon thought. So I'd say, all media do this. I mean, we can get terrified of new ones. I mean, after coming out of COVID, right? It's like we're all quite aware of the degree to which whole populations can be affected by, staring at these digital devices that we all carry around, and that clearly has powerful psychic effects. But I'm a historian and well, I'm a medievalist, but I always start my classes history of European civilization. It's like, when's modern history start? So you think about it from, she's been talking about the printing press, and maybe she means the electric. When does modern history start? And it's like, with writing, right? That we mentioned the alphabet, right? As soon as you have the alphabet, you already have one of these terrifying exteriorizations of our thought, ourselves. If famously, the Greeks make excellent use of the alphabet and write philosophy and such with it, but they're already in this very dangerous position. I mean, speech of itself is exteriorizing, right? You have thoughts in your head that you then form around these sounds that we use and then express to each other, and that exteriorizes it. But to create some kind of system whereby you can make a record of this thing that I've just said, that all by itself is just horrifying. What we see in European history over the centuries is the introduction of that writing system across, first in Greece and Rome, and into what Germania, what Tacitus called Germania, into the north, and everybody is just as powerfully affected by the arrival of the written, whether it's in a scroll or a book, as we have been by the power of the electrical, the digital. So it's not so much this medium or that medium. It's these artifactual extensions of our humanity into the world, which conversely we're made to do. Language is this great ability that we have as creatures, the word, but we also make stuff. So never McLuhan was always worried about this, and I'm worried about it. Never should we be getting to the point where it's like this or that tech of itself is diabolical. It's the sort of powers that we have as made in the image and likeness of God that gives us this balance on the choice between looking to God or looking away from God. But the electric pigeons should feel both kind of interesting and embodied and terrifying, and potentially contemplative and transcendent.
So I'll translate that.
Please do. You all are amazed. She actually does understand what I just said.
Yes. Uh, I love it, but I don't have any ability to say it in the way she's just explained it. I like making little pictures of things.
Very good.
So like, uh, so this is where the pigeon thing comes in. Okay, so like the whole idea behind all of this kind of communication we were looking at was how you can influence someone at a distance and how people are able to follow the mode of that surround sound electric communication, and how people are influenced by it really quickly to shift. And we were looking at the behavior of pigeons, which are these insignificant little birds that everyone calls rats of the air. But these creatures are everywhere in Christendom. They're depicted everywhere in the iconography of the Christian church. It's just that most people don't call them pigeons, they call them doves. A dove is actually just a pure white pigeon. Looking at why Christians from the earliest apostolic era focused so much on this animal as the symbol of both the Holy Spirit and also a symbol of Our Lady. Mm-hmm. I mean, in terms of the Coptic church, in the Coptic tradition, it's very commonly said amongst the Copts that Our Lady will appear with white doves or as white doves in the apparitions in Egypt. But there is something about this particular animal that behaves in a kind of electromagnetic way. So the appearance of the dove at Pentecost, the appearance of the dove at the baptism of the Lord, the recurring presence of the dove in all of these, and pigeons in all of these iconographies of the Christian church, made me start to think about this. What is it that they're trying to communicate? So we were looking at, okay, what does a pigeon do apart from scratch around for food wherever it can? They have these messenger quality to them, which is why people have been using them as telegram services for so long. They are literally animals that carry messages. Pigeon is the original Twitter,
yes!
Right? I mean, you want to go talking about Tweety birds and everyone getting crazy over Twitter, right. But like from ancient times, it was a pigeon. You wanted to tweet, you'd send a bird out, literally a literal bird out with a message attached to it. So they have this capacity to ride the electromagnetism of the world in a way that is very similar to internet connection with the communication mediums that we're using. You can send them thousands of miles away and they'll come back to you. I mean, I'm not really sure exactly how people have trained them to do this, but obviously to Christians in the early church, in the apostolic church, this was obviously very known. As you've said, Professor, when you're showing the Mosaic art in Christendom and they're depicting these animals, it's always in this kind of very dynamic and electromagnetic way. They're always connected to light itself. So we're looking at these birds as messengers, and so then in DCR we started to talk about this. Okay, so you've got carrier pigeons. What are we as Christians, if not carrier pigeons of the Lord? So the pigeon then becomes the symbol of us as Christians.
Which is, we're working round to why we're calling this the Mosaic Ark, right? I did kind of promise at the beginning that we were going to talk about why Mosaic and why an Ark. And one, we are, in fact, demonstrating to you all how it is that this kind of pigeon cloud effect of they fly here, they fly there, and eventually we end up with, oh my gosh, that's the image, right? That is where it is. And that kind of I mean, that kind of practice, what I was saying, the linearity of scholarship, right? It forces you into making this argument that, you start at the beginning of the book and you keep going until you get to the end and then stop, right? Joyce in Finnegan's Wake plays with that, because you get to the end of the book and it wraps around, because the first sentence is half of the sentence and the last sentence is the other half. The last thing at the end of the book is the other half, and it wraps around, and you just never, you can start anywhere in it, because it's like the referentiality of it is absolutely everywhere. It's interesting because, again, as we're talking about this, it can feel completely confusing, and she's making no sense, and why isn't she linear, and why isn't she pointing out this and this? I can do that. You all have watched some of my talks to realize that I do. But there is this sort of joy in the discovery and the reincorporation of, there's that element, these two things go together, oh my gosh, there it is. And that feeling of harm, that resonance and association and attachment, that is what McLuhan recognized was the medieval practice of exegesis. That it was this, what he called sort of grammatical, in the sense it was encyclopedic. You needed to kind of know everything, because you're always looking at everything in the world, the creatures and the stories and the references in this story and the references in that margin. And eventually it all starts, and I think the pigeon has to be it. Eventually it all starts coming together, and you see the shape of it, and then it flies away again. So this process of making meaning has been, it's nicely symbolized for us by the birds in their flight, because they don't seem to go anywhere in any one direction, and then you realize that it's been a pattern all along.
Mm-hmm. And the pigeon gets released from the ark and returns to the ark, which is why we have this as our theme, right? The central icon of humanity leaving the ark after the flood is the release of that carrier pigeon. It's the messenger going out into the earth again to tell Noah and his family what has happened. So we've been tweeting since the flood.
Well, and we're in this new flood, which is the flood of the digital, this chaos. I mean, absolute chaos. I've had this thing for the last several years of, now I've forgotten we're in chaos now, because it was race wars, totalitarianism, chaos, or Christ. And we had the race wars in 2020. We had the totalitarianism in 2021. And I was saying this last year in the 2021, right? Race wars, totalitarianism. Right now we're in chaos. We're in the 2022 is but I mean, you can feel it kind of. I think we're modeling well the confusion right now. this conversation. And I will say, I spent a lot of time trying to set up everything so this would be like more organized, and I failed. I can't, funnily enough, the internet is winning, because this has to happen in this kind of associative of where do we go place. And I can't see the chat yet because I can't figure out how to turn my windows back on. That we're in the chaos right now, right? But Christ is with us. Christ has been with us the whole time. Yes. But this, whatever the Christian nationalism is, I think most of what I'm seeing is a pale, which is not necessarily bad, sort of dove-like color, but is not yet the full rainbow mosaic of the joy that we are going to be able to catch a glimpse of if we can find our way back into the liturgy. And that's been another of our great themes. So let me see if I can recap and do the professor thing. It's like there's this McLuhan problem of the media, and the medium as the message, and understanding how the actual media that we're participating in has this psychic effect on us, right? And the internet, the flowingness of the internet, and the sort of, how many different images do you see in a day? I mean, on Telegram, you're mixing and matching and sharing and going in this and that, and it's like you can process all of that. It does make sense to people, and they will have some feeling of understanding of it, but they may not be able to narrate it very, very, very effectively, right? It's not there, but that medium that we're in is what we're doing. Christianity will always and is always the answer to this media nightmare. right? Because that is who Christ is. He is the Alpha and the Omega of the alphabet that we've been talking about. Think about that. So we can say the Alpha and the Omega. The alphabet is this instrument of tyranny and totalitarianism and imperial, globalism, which it is. But Christ enters into the world, becomes incarnate in the world, and is our Alpha and Omega, transforms that. I've been wondering about this. How do I come to McLuhan and Joyce and the scriptures and my obsession with understanding the story of Christ? I realized as I was talking to him when you came in, and I was about to tell them in the long-winded professorial way about the research that I've been doing this past year on reading the Gospels, which was my point about why I was taking those classes on New Testament. I can do this. I can find all the threads and pull them back together. But maybe you can. Maybe you guys have to watch this recording to realize that I did do it. Why was I growing up in the 70s attached to all of those desires and images? Well, I recognized. I grew up listening to Jesus Christ Superstar, right? It was actually originally not a stage production. It was simply just the music to start with, so it was sort of a radio play kind of thing. Jesus Christ Superstar and Franco Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth, which was shown on television, very McLuhan-y kind of thing, on television as a miniseries in 77. And I am fixed on the way Robert Powell portrayed Jesus. Apparently Powell spent the rest of his life saying, "I'm not Jesus. Stop saying I am." It was a character I played. But he did a beautiful portrayal of our Lord. And I was clearly, one, young enough, and two, in the television medium, impressed enough, right? McLuhan talks about how the television is the light projects onto you, and it's kind of, pixels are not what we had in television, but he said it was projected out onto you. Movies were projected onto a screen, and then that reflected. Television was shining the light onto you, and he got really interested in, well, what kind of effect would that have psychologically on you? So I am immersed in Jesus of Nazareth at the very impressionable age of 12 or so. And that, is what sent me to those classes in college and wanting to understand the Jesus in history, and then getting into the reading of scripture and layer, RIVERRUN, finding out that the screenwriter for Jesus of Nazareth, for Zeffirelli, was Anthony Burgess, who was a great Joyce scholar. And this kind of stuff happens all the time to me now, right? It's like it just happens again and again and again. And we've been watching videos of Burgess reading about Finnegan's Wake recently, and you can find it in my Telegram feed, right? He also wrote Clockwork Orange, right? So he understood what the terrible media effects were, but he also participated in creating the television series that turned me into... I was Christian growing up already, but it's just like, how are we? There's a positive element to our immersion in these media too, that Christ comes to us through these embodied media. That is literally what the incarnation is. It's his entering into our embodied medium.
Yes. As well, man is the ultimate medium of God, yes. Right? That's what it is. We're made in the image and likeness of the Logos. So we are the medium. We are the message.
Precisely. And that's what's so funny about McLuhan. It's like, one, beautiful, we got here, right? If we clip this out, that'll be the thing that everybody gets to remember, because it was the point, right? But that was the problem for McLuhan all along. I just saw there was some tweeting about McLuhan recently, and Steven Pinker, author of Enlightenment Now, that's a hilarious book if you want to read something about someone who started Pinker. We know how he was, associated with Epstein and everything like that. So whatever. His Language Instinct is actually an interesting book, because he starts with this linguistic claim of what we are as animals. I don't know whether he thinks it's creatures. As animals, is we have an instinct for language, right? And he's trying to say we are made to speak, and that does seem to be primary primary capacity that we have as tool makers and speakers, right? But then Pinker has to go through the, how do in Better Angels of Our Nature, he goes through the historical claim of, it's the Enlightenment that makes us able to, not be murderous all the time. And like, no, actually your timeline's off. It actually starts in the Middle Ages around the 12th century. And guess what? We can see it because of records, because, oh, right, they're Christian. But that's not what Pinker's going to say. In his version of the story, it's always Christianity is brutal and horrific, and we're better off without it. And thank God for the Enlightenment, because we got rid of all that nonsense. Well, so Pinker was tweeting yesterday or this past week about how McLuhan was, of course, fascist, because, what are you if you're not enlightened? Fascist, clearly, and weirdly drawn to mysticism. And I'm like, okie dokie, this is where we always end up, right? Mystical is, as I said, it sounds like the thunder. To most people, you have no idea what they're talking about. Christians sound like the thunder to those Enlightenment rationalists who cannot hear the joy. And McLuhan sounded nonsensical to everyone because he kept not really saying out loud, one, he was Catholic. He converted when he was doing his dissertation work. He was like, goes to be a medievalist and he ends up Catholic. Been there, done that. And because he was talking about the one truth of the one place in which the medium truly is the message, the word became flesh, right? And that what you just said about, we as human beings are God's medium. He talks to us through us with the pigeons and the electronic and everything. We are God's medium. Because and Christ enters into our incarnate reality as God's voice to us.
Yes. This is the liturgy.
Yes.
Without veering off into a different topic.
It's the same exact topic.
We're going to be doing that a lot. Everyone best get used to it.
Yes, this is the liturgy.
It's the liturgy. So, as you know, Professor, I have not learned apostolic Christianity through scholastics. I didn't read. So if anyone out there is going to ask me a lot of questions about the scholastic debates, just don't do it, because one, I don't know that much, and two, I don't care. I've learned apostolic. I might change my mind in a little while. But for now, I'm quite happy to stay away from all of it, because the way I see it, I've learned Christianity liturgically. I've learned it through the liturgy, which is the way medieval Christians were learning, right? And what happens when you go in and you do that is, without any preparation whatsoever, you begin learning the grammar of the faith. You begin learning the grammar of the scriptures by being completely immersed in it suddenly. And it's not starting at the beginning, going to the middle, and going to the end.
Right.
Like a lot of people will say, oh, well, I want to learn to read the Bible. Should I start at Genesis and go into the Apocalypse? No, it's Joyce. It's literally like reading Joyce.
Right.
You can jump in wherever you want to jump in. The point is, you have to jump in, and you're going to have to learn a completely new language, because the scriptures are intra-referential, right? They're self-referential. You start to learn the symbolism of the scriptures, whereas you can't read the New Testament without knowing the Old Testament, but you won't understand the Old Testament without knowing the New Testament. Right. Christ being the great revelator of the scriptures to us, because they are him. So going into that liturgical way of learning is essentially what the professor is describing. It's the way the medieval Christians would have learned Christianity. They dive in. So the liturgy itself is the process of becoming literate in the faith, but it's not just sitting there and reading, although we do read. And unlike the Protestant slur that says that the Catholics were dominating everybody by keeping them illiterate, it's absolutely not true, as the professor will be able to tell you. And even in our tradition, even in the Coptic tradition, we have an incredible emphasis on oral learning. but there is still a high level of written literacy. It's just never divorced from the oral.
Right.
So the majority of the way that I've been instructed has been in this McLuhan-esque way, and it is very, very Catholic and very foreign to non-Catholic thinkers. I mean, it's a different form of discipline, but it can look very undisciplined to people that are not used to it.
Right. Right. And now I will prove to you the magic of, we did not rehearse this, and yet you have hit the points that I planned. Because I have here, I have to like just hold it to my camera, right? The title of this was The Grammar of the Internet. And I did not tell her that this was going to be. And the other thing that I was getting to was this problem of how do you prevent simply like gibberish, right? The baffle garb being the thing that you fall into when you're thinking symbolically, and just everything associates with everything else, and everything refers to everything else. And as we're speaking,
the occultic psychosis,
which is the flip side of, I mean, one, I'm going to figure out, we're just doing too well. I'm going to stay with the stream here, because I do hope that people are leaving some comments in the chat. That we can get into this and say, well, what Professor and Pigeon here are doing. I'm the pirate, she's the pigeon. Don't worry. What we're doing.
She really is a pirate.
I am. I have gold-clad pirate ancestry. And I'm not kidding. If what we're doing here is like, it's all this medium is the message, and everything refers to everything else, and aren't we just going to end up in that psychosis of, solipsistic psychosis of claiming either the sola scriptura, which is not quite accurate of what the Protestants were doing, but it folds back into itself and becomes the utter solipsism of making your own religion. And of course we're not.
No.
No.
But you can't you cannot fall into that if you are following the liturgy. Right. That's the frame. And I think this is the issue. I mean, you have it all the time, right? When you're on Telegram, especially arguing with Protestants, when they don't understand icons, the veneration of Our Lady, instantly they knock out their ability to enter into this pigeon exegesis of the scriptures, right? Because this is the way that the early church was reading the scriptures. For those of you who don't know, the professor has written several books, but she's written a book specifically about this, showing Mary in the Old Testament. Mary is everywhere in the scriptures. But if you're not connected to the liturgical practice of the church, you will not be able to see it. Right. So the solipsism, I mean, it happens when you're not connected to tradition. You have to be anchored in the tradition of the church, the tradition of the liturgy, the tradition of the Eucharist, everything about that. It is the absolute anchor for someone to be able to think like this. Otherwise, you do end up
you end up crazy. You
flying off.
And the thing is, I think what we're trying to test and demonstrate is human beings are made to think this way, right? We are. So I'm glad I started with the thunder in the Joyce and keep thinking about it. Back in the day, I did a lot of reading in evolutionary psychology. Woohoo. Mm-hmm. And as you do, because I'm interested in mythology, I'm interested in patterns, I'm interested in stories. I've read all of it, right? You guys, I got as interested as I did, for example, in Jordan Peterson, because I was interested in the way he alone among academics seemed to be talking about myth, right? And but it's very, very easy if you go, towards Jung and his sun worship and, incarnating his voodoo thing that he's this lion god or something like that. Or, you go the other direction and you end up, well, mainly Jung, right? With, I don't know, Joseph Campbell, who was Catholic, but is like looking for the huge anthropological patterns. Anthropology is like the what religion becomes without the liturgical anchor. It's all practices. Some of this we're going to be, going into detail in future episodes, not today, of what happens when you're not properly anchored liturgically in our, in the truth, right, in the cross. And it's because both as we have language, right, so logos, we are made to have language, but we're also made to have mythos. We're made to have the story meaningfulness of everything. And that's why, for Christianity, we were trying to understand ourselves in this great wraparound story from Genesis to Revelation, which is only meaningful insofar as it wraps around. But it's the anchoring of story and liturgy, which is the anchoring of meaning and time, which is the anchoring of your soul in the church. All of that has to happen. Otherwise, yes, you end up making patterns out of everything.
Yes. Going insane.
So that you never have any way of understanding why it's all not just chaos. And the grammar of the internet, I was thinking in my notes, right? So in the net, right? There's this net that captures everything, and we can just trawl through. And do we get nothing but monsters when we surf the internet and go fishing, or do we get fish? Do we get actual sustenance? And one of the things I think I'm hoping that we can do in our conversations is help people see the way in which we're trying to, it's a disciplined practice, right? To write our poetry, we're actually having to meet regularly at a particular time on weekdays and write it in a particular structure with the iambic pentameter and the musical beat. It's like a metronome. You have to have the beat of the music. All of this structuring is actually necessary in order to not go completely nuts.
Yes.
Why is the world gone nuts?
I'm not entirely sure people are not just convinced. It's already happened.
Well, maybe. So I what I didn't want to do was change screens to the places where I have like other things stored. I can change screens now, but I think it may make your feed go wonky. So let me see if I can change screen to where I can see the chat. Oh no, look, it worked. Well, that's nice. Okay, so can I interact with... Oh, look at that. There's even some people talking, maybe. What the problem is, it might feed up and talk to me, and I will hear us. Okay. See, I just did that. Okay, see?
What have you done?
I did what I didn't want to do in the middle of that conversation. So let me go back. Oh. Chat, I am now looking at you. Working class bear, hello. Casey, hello. Mel, hello. Burning Pitch, evening. Casey, a medievalist thinking too far ahead. Scholars are still studying medieval work 1,000 years later. Well, indeed, right? We'll still caught a live stream. Yes, Scott, SOTS SOTS. All right. They've had a nice conversation while we've been talking. They're worrying about people being made to be illiterate, I think is a problem. Mike, the Australians stole your notes ahead of time. Who's the pirate now? Well, pattern superstitions.
Well, I'm actually in the future, so if I did that, that just proves I'm an interdimensional time traveler.
You are the interdimensional time traveler, and I don't know where. So anyway, what I thought, just to make this a little less completely abstract and maybe end on in a more comprehensible note, I had an example of something that's just happened in our chat. I also got a lot of things in my lap. Okay, of the way things play out when we are discovering these resonances and associations, right? And I did actually tell her that I was going to do this, but it's let me set this up. Okay, so one of the exciting things that happens while we're writing the poems. Oh, see, there you are embiggened. Just a second. Need to fix you. Woo. Y'all should be reading that text that I put up online just now.
Have you given them homework already?
I've given them screen work. They should read the screen. Oh, that one I did better. You're a little bit better framed, although these are not as, it's not as good. Okay, so this is from Aurora Borealis. All right, and it's, I actually have a copy of Aurora Borealis, but I've got all my, so I'll read it off screen. Right, this is one of the riddles that the bears are given to have to answer, or as it were, at least meditate on, as they climb in the holy mountain and are looking for the panda who's been raptured while he was eating the offerings on the altar, which should be completely obvious to everyone what that was. And although it wasn't to one reviewer that
was it obvious.
we had one reviewer to say, isn't this a bit traumatic? And we're like, well, ecstasy kind of is, but we'll leave St. Teresa to explain to her what was going on there. Right. Okay. So, and then the other bears have come along to, find what happened to the panda where the griffin took him. And they see a series of hieroglyphs on the wall of the cavern that they're walking through. And this is the third of the three mysteries. As they climb the staircase and assembled, I'm going to have to get my book. Just a sec. I can't read it off screen. It's too little. So here's my book. It's an actual book. You can buy the book.
You should buy the book.
You should buy the book, because then you can read it in like big type and not trying to do it on screen. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is the one that's on screen that you can see. As they climbed the staircase and ascended, the bears saw crystal shapes carved in the frost, drops of sun, and with them snowflakes blended into a crystal bridge with archways crossed. The scene emerged now as a rainbow bended near a shining crown that was degaussed. Writ round this diadem of clay and coal, quote, within the darkest earth, the great light glows. Now, this was one of the passages that I do know that Kilts actually mainly wrote herself, because I told her to, saying, we need riddles. Can you write some riddles? And looking at the picture that goes with this, actually Kilts can't see it, but I can remind you which one it is, right? You remember what's in the picture.
Oh, no, I can see you.
You can see me now.
I can see
okay.
you. Okay.
So
yes.
Tell the people what you see in that picture, or what maybe was going on in the imagery.
So I was describing a gemstone, which should be the most obvious part of that picture. But the idea behind that being a gemstone, there's a little bit of a riddle behind it as well, because the gemstones in the scriptures are always associated with the city of the New Jerusalem, but also the ephod of the high priest of Israel. Mm-hmm. For anyone who's particularly familiar with the Levitical pattern of liturgy as it began after the Exodus, there's a very important part of the priestly garments, which is the ephod, which is this tablet covered in precious stones, and then there's the Urim and Thummim on the shoulders, and this was a divination device. We would know it as a divination device, but essentially the idea behind the gemstones in that is that they are representing elements of Christ, elements of mankind, redeemed mankind. So in this riddle, I was describing exactly what it is about the body of man is going to reveal the immortal God in unification with him, because that is what Christianity is. Ultimately, what we are seeking is the complete oneness with God. The Greeks call this theosis. I don't know what the Latins call it. I can't recall. But we have our name for it in the Coptic traditions. Tawahado. It just makes being made one with Christ, complete unification with Christ. The saints have achieved this. the the idea is, how is it that the omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent God is able to enter into us as what we are, which is just basically clay,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are minerals from the ground that have been animated. From dust you come, from dust you shall return. So the idea behind this riddle is to get everyone to start meditating on the process of becoming one with God in that clay. So if you read that riddle, then hopefully you'll understand what we were depicting in that picture. That from something as basic as clay or coal, uh, light can shine through. It's the transformation of the human soul that allows that to happen. The most crystal clear of any person alive who's ever experienced this was, of course, the Blessed Virgin Theotokos. She is the clearest crystal. She is the one who points the way. So the Panagia is the one who shines the brightest in this way.
And there's lovely poetry, particularly like Hildegard Bingen has a wonderful image of her as the crystal, and that is that's a standard description of Mary, that she's the crystal through which the light shines, and it's this image of the incarnation, that the light is shining through her. Okay, so we wrote this poem about this time last year. It was well, for us last summer, for you last winter. And we were working on this image, and I had this amazing moment when I realized we were trying to describe basically a Silmaril, right? That I'd been doing all my Tolkien videos, and it was this image of a gemstone holding light, right, and shining forth. And when I've talked about the Silmarils, it's things like the monstrance with the shining of the host and the Eucharist, but also just that there was this radiant gemstone. And as I was working on we were working on this poem, I was actually visiting my mom, and I was sitting at this table under this lamp. The McLuhan moment will be coming in a second, right? Yes. And we got this image suddenly of these shining souls, diamond like. And when we're doing the poetry and the things chime into place, and the meter works and the rhymes fit and everything, it's like this sort of revelation of, oh, there it is. And I'm sitting there at my mom's table, and I look up and I realize I'm underneath the image that we've just written, right? These yes. amazing, well, and then they turn into eggs in the story. You realize we've written these crystal eggs, which that was one thing. That lamp has been in my mother's house for 40 years, right? I grew up with that lamp, and I'd never seen it. This is a McLuhan moment. Now I recognize, because one of his famous phrases is, electric light is pure information. You don't notice the electric lights, right? You are surrounded by them all the time. They have changed our world more than any, I mean, so whether the internet or the electric light transformed humanity utterly. And McLuhan understood that. It's like gaslight. We talk about gaslighting and the gas lights. See, the electric lights, you can turn night and day off and on like that, right? It's changed time. Everything is different. And we don't even notice the way in which light is around us, unless you're trying to video and not, tell you to put a good light on your face so that we can see you and stuff. Right? It's
I tried.
It's a this we see it but we don't see it moment, so that you realize we're always in that light. Well, okay, so that was the secret to what we were trying to achieve with Aurora Borealis. That we were saying, the bears find themselves in the light of the griffin, and that was meant to be our revelation to in the animal story of the I'd say anagogy. The fancy word for it is that you suddenly recognize yourself in the story, recognizing yourself in the story, and that sort of cascade of associations and references is mean, one thing, it seems poetry is capable of expressing it in a way nothing else is. You can't do it in a scholastic logical argument, which was the big debate that McLuhan understood was between the grammarians and the dialecticians, right? It's not so much the rhetoricians and the dialecticians. It's the grammarians who name things and do the poetry and the music and the associations and resonances and naming of things. I said that already. Versus the scholastic logicians who make syllogisms and arguments. And of course, one of the deep things that happens in the 16th century that McLuhan recognized was this quarrel between, it's not so much Protestants and Catholics, it's quarrel between the grammarians and the dialecticians, the scholastics who destroyed the monastic poetical liturgical thinking in their interminable and, oh my gosh, I am so bored by them, debates over I mean, and it gets into Marian doctrine too. Things like, is she the Immaculate Conception? It was like, yeah, she's in the liturgy. She's praised. We praise her, and you are all beautiful, my love, and there's no spot in you. That solves it for me. Oh no, if you get in the dialectical mode, you have to then argue it out, right? And there is a place for the dialectical mode, but when this Aristotelian dialectical mode erased the monastic liturgical mode out of medieval thinking, that's when everything fell apart. And it's not so much necessarily the printing press or modernity or this, it's the loss of the poetic grammar that fractures the soul, right? And you go into either mystical nonsense, which we've said it, right? People go there, they get, why does everybody, it's like, we're getting to the real meat of it here. It took us hour and a half. But that's how deep we have to go to get to this place where you say, this is why we're all surrounded by rainbows all the time right now. This is why everybody is going nuts and trying to dress up like rainbows. And you do it whether or not you are, you do it in the hair color and the pride parades and the nonsense and stuff like that. But what McLuhan understood even in the 60s was this desire to be in the light was reflected in the way in which everyone was dressing and what he called international motley, right? It's like, I think Johnny Depp has perfected it in his own wardrobe. It makes no sense whatsoever what culture your art is coming from, because it's like all at the same time, right? You've thrown the bedspread on and, your wedding dress and, the jewelry that you got in New Mexico. I have that. And it all goes into this one great... it's that desire of the monastic and mystical, which, because it's no longer disciplined liturgically, turns into, either faux liturgies, people trying desperately to make themselves have some kind of structure, or straight up madness.
Right? Yes. Well, this is the thing. If you talk about being in the story to people, they from what we've seen, they start to sort of get very afraid, because what does that mean to be in the story? But it's very simple, because every time you go to a liturgy, what are we doing? We're praying for our reposed saints. We're praying for our reposed patriarchs and popes. They are not dead in our tradition. They are praying for us. We can ask them to pray for us. So what are we actually doing? We're communicating with the church from now all the way back until the resurrection. So if we can do that, if we can actively and instantly send tweets to the saints, because that's what we do in a liturgy, right? We're talking to people which the non-Catholic world are considered dead. This is not normal behavior. For anyone who thinks you're going to become a trad-cath and look normal and be more conservative, it's not going to happen.
You're going to end up in Mosaic motley too.
No, you're going to end up in the Mosaic.
You're going to end up in the Mosaic, in the joy of this liturgy. Right.
That's Catholic Europe.
Right.
They're batshit.
Right.
So, in the best possible way, but we're looking at what, like yesterday, this church in Greece that just has this influx of little snakes that go and hang out around an icon during the Dormition. For the outside, this looks shockingly occult. The thing is, we are not divorcing the material world from the spiritual anymore. You can't do that after the incarnation of our Lord. He's here in flesh, in the Eucharist. So that's what's happening to us. So, I mean, in terms of like entering the mosaic, he's in it now. He's where you are right now. So if you can go into a liturgy, kiss the icons, ask the saints to pray for you, you're in the body of Christ in exactly the same way all of those reposed saints are. Yes. So the mythology of the scriptures, the revelation is now, the apocalypse is now, you're a part of it. But realizing that is quite terrifying.
Right.
Because you start to realize you're a part of the mythology of the scriptures. Your life, your personal self is potentially an icon of the church. That is a shocking thing to come face to face with. But you can do it if you come into it through the poetic, through the grammar. The scholastics and the dialectics are not going to get you there. They'll help you in other things, but they're not going to allow you to see what the medieval monastics saw, which was themselves in the mythology of Christ, the history of the human race.
And you need what McLuhan started with the Trivium, right? You need the Trivium, you need the language arts, but you also need the number arts. You don't get it. You need both the Trivium and the Quadrivium, because the Quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, it's not science, it's liturgy. It's you need the numbers to be able to build the beautiful buildings that you are worshiping in. You need the music, obviously, to sing in the liturgy. You need astronomy to know the time. And this is what is fascinating about it, as we've been talking about, saying without this structure, without the liturgy, without the prayer life and the discipline of the praise, you end up nuts. It anchors us in both understanding through the language and in time, and like the meaning of structure, which is what the numerical is, the Quadrivium, which is what poetry is, because it gives you language in meter. It gives you logos in number. And therefore, absolutely everybody should be just as good at and if you take your SATs, you should be just as good in words as numbers, and vice versa. There should be no this sort of fracturing of the humanities from STEM is as much a catastrophe as everything else. They're both dying, right? With the sciences all by themselves end up tyrannical and we've just lived through it. And the humanities without the number ends up unstructured and crazy. You've got to be both number and word. And that the monastic tradition was trained in the Trivium and the Quadrivium because they're training for the liturgy, for this structure that we're looking at. It's the altar at the church where I go to Mass in Chicago. There's some more layers, which is why when Kilts is talking about finding yourself in the story with the saints, right? That we had this little moment. I want to get them to this moment that I was showing. I've been asked to look at a book of poems because the author was hoping either I could help her promote them. Her name's Rachel too, which is kind of fun. To either help promote them or review them, and they're by a poet that I'd never actually, looked at, paid attention to, and so I, kind of Googled around and looked up, and I found the first page of the translation of some of these little poems in an earlier edition, and I, posted that page into our poetry chat. And there was this poem. There's this line. He wrote in couplets, right? So he wrote in German, but in these rhyming couplets, like the ones that we first used in centrism games in our first poem. And this was the version that I posted. Pure as the finest gold, hard as the granite stone, holy as crystal clear, your spirit must become. And then Kilts showed up. What is this? Where did you find this? Because
I learned that in song 3 months ago from a friend of mine, and I've been hearing this sung in the background over and over and over again until I knew it with slightly different lyrics. But I freaked out because this kind of thing happens all the time. So I just said, hold on a second, who is that? She said it's Angel of Silesia.
Which is a funny name because that wasn't the name that he was baptized with. He was baptized as Johann Scheffler, a Lutheran. He was born in 16.
Did he stay Lutheran?
Did he stay? Did he?
Protestant?
Indeed, he did not. Indeed, he did not. He went and studied in Leiden in Belgium, which there's some more resonances with one of the people I've been working on this past year, a commentator who was there maybe when he was. Read a lot of mysticism, Jacob Boehm and others, maybe some alchemy and Kabbalah, and came out Catholic, much to the horror of the contemporary Protestants. They accused him, selling trinkets and games and gambling cards and rosaries and things like that, and wrote this amazing series. Apparently there's 1,600 of these plus little epigrams, right? And they are based on the book that I've been looking at. She did a nice little introduction saying it's weird to read them because they're these mystical meditations mixed in with sort of witticisms on daily life. And I'm like, whoa, gee, it's telegram. It's, the 17th century version of little posts, right? Little quip posts that you get throughout the day. And some of them are, meditations on the meaning of our souls as crystal, and others of them are somewhat more mundane. And then realizing that you had never heard this. You said you heard it 3 months ago. You wrote that poem for Aurora Bearialis before you knew this?
Yes.
It's like, how did you write Angelus Silesius's couplet before you knew Angelus Silesius had written that? And interestingly, Pigeon.
It's just Pigeon.
It's the wraparound effect of these, which you're in the stream, in looking for these patterns and from the scriptures to the liturgical references and back out, this kind of thing happens to us all the time in our poetry writing, which is why you hear squeals, if you could hear it in telegram, of us recognizing the resonances and the patterns coming together. We're not done yet. So Angelus Silesius, he took the name because he was from Silesia, and so he calls himself basically John the Angel of Silesia. And I say, oh gee, where's Silesia? I've never really thought about Silesia. Oh, guess what? It's in Poland. Guess what else is in Poland? Well, there's a region that maybe you hear a lot about. I mean, it's famous for coal mines, iron, zinc, lead, and salt. It's famous for coal, right? Which is why there's a particular town there that became famous in the 20th century. I'm very interested in exactly where all this goes. I'm not sure how to say it in Polish, but in German it's Auschwitz. We don't even know where this is going to take us now. And then I'm like, gee, okay, St. John Cantius is the saint whose altarpiece you see here at the church where I in Chicago go to Mass, right? And we are very traditional in that we do the Latin Mass, both the Novus Ordo newer version in the Latin, but also the old one. The canons are magnificent because they're so interested in the restoration of the sacred. If you watched me read Aurora Bearialis, the first act, to the children, it's at this church, right? And Cantius, I'm not really sure who he is because, well, I'm not Polish and I haven't been Catholic for that long. And he was actually born in 1390, died in 1473, and was famous, well, not like St. Francis for colorful activities and stuff, but he's a professor. And in fact, one of the canons at Cantius consulted with me a year or so ago in COVID time about some of the miracles that are associated with Cantius, when the altarpiece here is showing one of the ones that he's famous for, which was he's coming and going from his lectures, right? You see him in his academic robes, and this young woman had a milk jug that broke, and he pauses and takes care of her and fixes the jug, right? And it's like, well, Francis had better miracles, right? He talked to birds and stuff. And this is all we get, right? This, he heals the jug, and I'm talking to Father Dennis, who's writing the life of Cantius for the group, the community, and he's studying all the manuscripts that we have in Cantius's own hand. And of course, I say, aha, to a historian, that's the real relic, right? It's like you have his autographed manuscripts, you have his own writing. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. They put some in the book. It's nice. But, there's the sort of tension between, well, he's the academic whose knowledge we have in his own books, right? He's right there. He dies in 1473, right there on the cusp of printing. So, he's in the last generation of the great manuscript scholars, and dies right as printing is coming in. And then Father Dennis is worrying about, the way the printed version of his life is carried on. This kind of thing is what I get into as a scholar and stuff. Okay, fine. So you're looking at the painting, you're saying, there he is fixing the milk jug, and you say, what's that church behind him? Well, that is the church in Krakow, where he was a professor, and that the community in Chicago who came from Poland built, and then they're remembering him. This is a workman's church, right? It's very, very beautiful, but it was all like the local community built it, to true Christian crafts, and they're painting their home church in the picture that they are now worshiping in front of in Chicago, right? So this home away from home. Well, where's Krakow? It's kind of near Auschwitz. And in fact, Cantius grew up in the what's now the Auschwitz region in Silesia, which means he grew up in the region that then Angelus of Silesia becomes this great seven. We're all in this same story, right? You just the cascade and cascade and cascade and cascade, and you realize we are constantly being shown the mystery that we are participating in time over and over and over again. That this happens both. I mean, this is why, as a historian, I'm going to look up the chronology. I'm going to look up the geography. I'm going to look up the space and time where these things happen. And you start realizing all of the layers of meaning that we are participating in constantly in our incarnate experience. That is the other thing that Christ calls us to do. He became incarnate in time. The cross is this great, like, pin on the river of experience. AD we date by Christ. So there's low layers. I'm not done yet. but I hope you have some more thoughts on that.
Yeah. How many different parts of the Delta do you want me to go down?
A few more. I think we're going to go for 2 hours at least here. If Owen can run for 4 on this platform, I'm filling it in a little bit just now.
Go for it. Well, like the RIVERRUN, right? I mean, that's time. But I mean, I come, I'm in a continent that didn't have a BC AD distinction until 200 years ago. So there's an argument, everyone's arguing politically correct arguments regarding what it means to be colonized and what it means to have an empire colonize a new territory. But no one really has the thought of figuring out what Australia is without Christendom, and it's the world without the BC AD distinction. We live in the Dreamtime in Australia. So the least Christian that this continent becomes, the more we're going back into Dreamtime, which is into the flow of time without the incarnation of Christ in it, which is chaotic. It's chaos. So a lot of things I've been talking about with you, Professor, is that the natural way of thinking in Australia lends itself more to this kind of mystical pattern recognition almost, but it's completely unanchored in anything chronological. There is no logos in Australia without Christianity. It doesn't exist. We don't have the monuments here to remember history like everyone does in Europe and in Asia. There is no civilizational monument that can remind us of the past without having connection to it in a liturgical way. The landscape here makes you completely immersed in a kind of all time, or what Joyce would call everywhen, right? It's past, present, and future bled together into one Dreamtime experience. And having grown up in it and left, I recognize it for what it is, but it's it's a healthy thing for Christians to be thinking of themselves in every when. The problem is that without Christ, every when becomes psychotic.
Right.
It becomes unanchored in anything real. Whereas once Christ has entered into our world and entered into time, he's keeping time. Christ is the metronome of history.
Yep.
Right? So you've been working with us on the iambs, on the beats, scanning, keeping time, having the meter. That's the quadrivium, having that measurable arithmetic, counting things. Without having these poetry projects, where I've been living, we've lost all, like we had lost all liturgy during COVID in Australia, in every sense of the word. The sacred liturgy had been cancelled with the exception of, live streaming it, which is not the same because it's not the surround sound, it's not multisensorial, and you cannot have the liturgy without that multisensorial surround sound. But we'd lost all of the secular markers of time. They'd been eliminated. Australia lost a metronome for 2 years. So when I started working with you, I mean, you essentially have helped me keep time for 2 years. I don't think I would have done as well during the COVID lockdowns as I have without it, because, I mean, we're not designed to be completely severed from any liturgical experiences whatsoever. Right. Even tribal societies have never had this before. They've kept time in their own ways. The human mind has to have a metronome, has to have metric. What we did in Australia was the elimination of any kind of metric of time. Right. So it's been an interesting experiment. Very interesting to see the effect it's had on everybody. Poetry is the purposeful measurement of that, keeping time, keeping everything. So when you're talking about Silesius and Cantius and how suddenly these things cross over because we've got Krakow and we've got Auschwitz and we've got a church in Chicago, and how does this fit with some goth chick who wrote a riddle about gemstones, and who's been like humming this Silesius bit? Well, it fits because this is the grammar of history. Right. This is what we're looking at. We're looking at the grammar of everything together. And it connects and it fits in terms of that monastic way of thinking, in terms of that medieval way of thinking. But only if it's connected in Christ. Right. Like, you know what I mean? So as you've said, like we have to be able to see that BC AD, but also see Christ in time, then that kind of experience makes sense. Right. And then when I find you suddenly posting Silesius, and I'm like, oh my God, I understand this perfectly. I don't feel psychotic. I'm not psychic. It's just that the patterns are there. It's like I suppose a kind of science in that you're measuring things that are already in existence. It's just a different measure, different measuring tool. Well, this is I think, I mean, a lot of what we want to help people explore is this sense of when you start seeing these patterns, how do you distinguish history from not myth, right? Because we're in the myth history; it's all myth history, but the associations that the demons are making rather than the meaningful, and the truth is joyous and happy and anchoring, and so it's interesting going back to our theme of but to hear Christians talk about this sounds nonsensical when you're not used to the anchor, which is very interesting. It's not chaos. I think this is probably something that's important to mention. Right. It's not chaos. I mean, we don't find this chaotic at all. In fact, it's only orientating. because every single time this has happened since we've started the writing process, you've found something else which has led us to more understanding of things that have been evident to medieval monastics, right?
Yes. Well, and so we were playing with this egg a lot, right? Which is Hildegard's vision of the cosmic birth,
yes.
right? And we showed hand drawn bear this so that it's somewhat in the one of the pictures in Aurora Borealis, but that we are, I mean, Hildegard looks a bit nuts in her visionary exercises, but she like all, I mean, the great Christian mystics are grounded in liturgy and are, this is what, you know, when you say Catholic or Orthodox or you know, the long Christian tradition, it resonates with itself. So it's not going off all by itself. It always, you know, it's the church singing, and it does make sense and it is consistent. And we are trying to test that to find ways. And I mean, in our poetry, we're hoping that we're finding a modern digital context for expressing these, you know, not eternal truths, because we're doing the in time truths of the incarnation, these incarnate truths of Christ's engagement with us in our humanity. So that, you know, I like that you know, the last year is people, like, you know, getting chickens and everybody's getting eggs, and you start realizing, you know, we're the joy of the fertility in the eggs and life and new life coming from eggs is the thing that we're, you know, it's like the ordered beauty of life.
Yes. Oh, I've lost
That's
you.
okay. You've lost me, or you've lost the...
Oh no, the audio cut.
Okay.
That's fine. I've got you back now.
So that's an awful lot to absorb, everybody, right? Have you stayed with us? There is yet more, and of course, now you understand that
we went from James Joyce to Auschwitz. I mean, that's quite a ride.
And we've been guided all the way by our dove, right? Whom we are going to be regularly sending out into the world, and we hope to share with you, I mean, some of the process, right? It's like it's not, if you read it in the poem, you say, look, here's this one line that then has this, you know, the within the darkest earth the great light glows, and realize that there is a, you know, a tradition that we weren't even aware of reading through the eggs. And I mean, we were aware of the eggs in the crystal and Mary and so forth, but not of Silesius and this association between where he came from and where St. John Cantius came from, and, you know, therefore where I am participating in the, you know, the presence of our Lord on, you know, when I go to Mass, and that I'm in our opening and closing videos for this podcast. You'll see the altar with the Cantius image now, and you'll see this wonderful window with the sacraments. This is the sacrament of confirmation with the descent of the Spirit, that we are hoping by way of example, and, you know, there's some theory, there's some example, but an example of the sorts of tidbits that we're finding, the things that the dove can bring back in her beak, to give a sense of the joy of this entire flood that our ark is floating on throughout. So we hope to be here weekly, which is our plan, because we're very monastic, and we're going to be on, you know, we're going to be doing this on a regular schedule, which anchors us in time. The stream needs to be anchored in time, and hopefully the pigeon can translate the professor. The professor can beg for translation, because otherwise I talk in footnotes.
No, perfectly logical.
and literally only one person seems to understand all of the references that I'm making, and I don't know why, and I don't know how that happens, except for it does seem to all come to us through the liturgy and RIVERRUN. RIVERRUN. Here, let's listen to the thunder. We'll tell you more about Joyce. We're currently all reading Joyce, so that will come into it. But we're also currently writing another poem with pigeons and so forth, and it will be telling you about that. There's always more. The river does not stop. We're in that. So,
Should I sing Silesius as an outro?
I think you should sing Silesius as an outro.
Alright. Alright. It's probably not going to be very good, but whatever. You'll hear what I've been hearing. Pure as the finest gold, firm as the granite rock, transparent as the quartz crystal, my soul shall be. So that's like the little tune that I was hearing for ages and ages and ages. So as soon as I saw Silesius, that was in my head.
It's
running,
RIVERRUN.